Hey, what's up everyone? I hope you all are doing well. In today's video, we will be looking at how we can use Entity Framework's database first approach to fetch data in an ASP.NET Core Razor web application. So let's jump straight inside Visual Studio and start developing our code. We have opened our Visual Studio solution, and here we will create a new project. We will click on that and we will choose C# and web as our filters, and inside that we will choose the first option over here, which is ASP.NET Core web application, and click next. After that we will give a name to our project and solution. So for this one we will say Entity Framework Core Database First Demo. So we have given a name for the project and solution. We'll click on next. And from the target framework, I have .NET 5 installed, which is the latest version. So I will select that, but you can do this in .NET 3 as well. But to install .NET 5, you simply have to go to their website and click .NET 5 and install the necessary packages for your 64-bit or 32-bit versions. And you might also have to update your Visual Studio IDE over here. And basically then you would be able to see that option and will be able to create .NET 5 solutions as well. So I have none as my authentication type and configure for HTTPS to be checked and click create. So this will create a .NET 5 Core web application, a Razor web application for us. Our application has been created successfully, and we have built our application by right clicking on the project and basically building it. Or you can do Ctrl+Shift+B to build your entire solution. We will now click on the play button to see what does .NET gives us out of the box for this Razor Pages application. So out of the box we can see that we have a website ready, and this website uses Bootstrap's CSS by default, and we have a nav bar on the top which has the home and privacy page, and we can toggle between the two, and we will add more links over here. And we will fetch data inside a table using Entity Framework Core database first approach. So let's go back to Visual Studio and install our NuGet packages for Entity Framework. Let's install our necessary NuGet packages. So we will right click on the dependencies and click on, we will stop our application first and right click on dependencies, manage NuGet packages. This will open our NuGet package window, and we will basically browse for two packages. One is called Entity Framework Core.SqlServer, and this is the full name. I'll have the names available in the description below. So we have to install the SQL Server one, so I'll click on install. We can see the status of the NuGet package installation over here in the output window, and we can see it is successfully installed. So we'll come back to the browse menu again and install Entity Framework Core.Tools. And this package is basically required to do scaffolding and migrations for Entity Framework Core. So we will click on it and click on install. So that is installed as well. If you have an existing database with yourself, you can use that and basically change, when we go along the video, change the database configuration as per your requirements. Otherwise, if you don't have a local database, you can go on to this website, which is SQLServerTutorials.net and /load sample database. They have done an amazing job to create SQL scripts so that you can create a database and basically load the database with some real world values as well. So we will be using this database, which is called Bike Stores, and you can see they have all the steps to basically create the database. And if I come back to my SQL Server, I have this database loaded as Bike Store, and inside the tables I have many tables over here. So let's see if the production.brands table has some data in it, and we can see that there is some data. So we will basically try to pull this data using Entity Framework Core, the database first approach, because we have existing data, and we will try to display that on the brands web page. So let's do that. Now that we have installed the NuGet packages and we have the database with us, we will now go on and basically introduce the Entity Framework core inside our solution. So we will come to Tools, Entity, NuGet Package Manager and NuGet Package Manager console. So we will execute this command over here, which is called Scaffold-DbContext. So basically this will pick up everything from the database that we are supplying in the connection string over here and will create a model structure for our solution into this output directory called models, and we'll be using a SQL Server connection for this database. So we will use this and we will modify this connection string as per our own connection string. So we will go to View, Server Explorer, and we will create a connection over here so that you can just directly copy the connection string from there. We will right click over here, Add Connection. We will choose Microsoft.SqlServer and continue. The server name that we are using is dot, because I installed the server as a dot, but you may have a different name. So dot, and if we come down to the database list, I have my bike store along with the others coming as well, but I will choose bike store and click OK. Now I have a connection to the database, and basically I will now right click over here, Properties, and copy the connection string from here. So that's just one way, or you can modify the connection string over here as well. I will list this in the comment section below. So we have the data source, we have the database, and we have integrated security as true, and every other thing can be the same. So we will copy this command, and coming back to our NuGet Package Manager console window, we will paste this here and click Enter. This will start scaffolding our database into the model structure over here, and we will then basically be able to use the context and access the models once we have the connection to the Entity Framework core database. We can see here that the scaffolding command has been successfully executed, and we got a bunch of files in this models folder. Every file in here, which is the models file, represents a table inside the database. So the brands table represents a brand model class over here, and it all has the virtual connections to the other products that it is linked to as well. And we also have a bike store context.cs, which is basically a representation of our database, and we can use this file to basically access the tables. So we can see we have DB sets to each of the tables that has been created over here, which represents the table in the database. And there's an onConfiguring method which uses the connection string that we provided to make a connection. But we can see that it is not the best way to add the connection string over here. So we will make changes to that and see how a real world application would use the connection string and use SQL Server as a method to connect to the database. So let's make the changes over here. We will start by deleting this if statement over here. So delete that, and there's nothing else in the onConfiguring method. We will come to our app settings.json, in which the connection string should actually belong, and below this allowed hosts we will create a tag for the connection strings, and inside that we basically want to have a connection string for the bike store. So we'll say bike store connection string, and you can have any other name as you want to. And inside the data source we will give the same connection string as we gave in the scaffolding command. So we will copy that and we will paste it here, only the connection string part. So now that we have this ready, we will also want to make some changes in the startup file, because our connection to the database no longer belongs in the onConfiguring method. So let's jump onto the startup file and make the connection from there. So in here we will come to the services, configure services method, and we will say services dot add db context pool, and basically give our context, which is the bike store context over here. So we will say bike store context and control dot to pull in the dependencies from the models. And to this method, we will basically pass some options. So we will say options dot use SQL Server, and we'll say control dot to pull in this dependency from Entityframework.core, and to that we will provide the connection string. So we will pull the connection string from the app settings.js using the configuration interface over here. So configuration dot get connection string, and it needs a string name. So the connection string name that we gave over here is bike connection string. We'll copy that and paste it inside this. Alright, so I think it's missing a bracket over here. Yeah, it's all good now. So we have set up our connection to the database inside the startup file. So we'll use dependency injection here. We are using dependency injection over here to basically inject the bike store context, and we can use this elsewhere now in our services to basically talk to our database. So the next thing is to create some services, and we'll make sure we use the bike store context to access the database. We will come back to our application and create a new folder over here. So we will right click, add new folder called data, in which we will have our services. So we want to create an interface which will be called iBikeStore, and it is an interface. Create that and make it public. Remove the extra dependencies from here, and we will create two functions over here. One will be a task of IEnumerable, or and I'm clicking control dot to basically import the dependencies over here, and IEnumerable of type brand, because we want to access the brand table. Pull that from the models, and the method name would be get brands. And we will now create another class which will be called bike store SQL, to basically tell that this is a SQL implementation of the iBike store, and implement that by clicking on this red dot and implement interface. So we want to make this an asynchronous method, so I will add the async keyword. Async of type task of IEnumerable brand. So we will now implement this. Over here we want to basically in the constructor have the access to the database context that we injected, which is the bike store context. So we will come back to the bike store SQL class and inject it over here. And we'll basically instantiate this and assign it to the property, a public property over here. And we'll make the public property private because we don't want to expose it further. So we will make this a private, and then we will use this bike store context to basically access the brands table like this, and we will just return this from here. But because this is an asynchronous one, we basically have to give an await keyword, and now we can use it like we can return it as a to list async. we will use Entityframework.core, and we will return the get brands like this over here. Now we will inject our bike store SQL and iBike store inside our startup so that we can use dependency injection and utilize these services inside our pages. So in the configure services method, we will come and add the services over here. So services.add scoped, because by default add DbContext pool is scoped as well. And we will say add scoped iBike store control dot to bring dependencies, but I'll just type it properly. When I ask for iBike store, give me an implementation, the SQL implementation, so bike store SQL, and that's it. Now this service has been injected, so we can use it inside our brands page, which we don't have it at the moment, so we will create one. We will right click on the pages and add a new razor page. We will have an empty razor page, and we will give the name as brands. Now our razor page has been created and we have the route because we have the add page parameter. We will come back to the shared folder in the layout and we will give our page a nav. So we will copy paste the privacy nav, paste it over here and change it to brands, and the URL to brands as well. So with that, we'll go back to the brands.cs HTML, or rather inside pages, the brands.cs file, and we will have an async method, and we will say onGet async. In our constructor for this brands model, we will basically inject our service over here. So we inject the iBike store, import the dependencies, and we will say bike store, and we'll basically instantiate and assign this property. Alright, and we can make this a private property because we are just going to use this inside the brands page. Along with that, we will also have a list. So we will make a public list of brands, which is coming from the models folder, and we will call it brands. This is the list that we will populate by calling the database. So we will call the database using the bike store context over here. So bike store dot, we should have a get brands, or we should use the bike store over here. So bike store dot get brands, we will call it as a method and basically assign this back to the brands that we have as a public list so that we can use it in the razor page. This is because we cannot assign the get brands directly to the brands list over here, because get brands is coming as an asynchronous list of enumerable of type brand, whereas our brands is a list of type brand. So we will basically put this in a variable. So we'll say var brands is equal to await bike store and get brands, and in the second line we'll assign the brands to brands.toList, and we also have to make a change over here. We have to return a task of type iActionResult, and basically after assigning our brands we will return the page. Now we have successfully implemented the get method over here, and let's go on to make the changes in the CS.html file so that we can display our table of brands onto the page. So we will create a table for ourselves, and we will use some bootstrap classes. So I'll use the class table bordered, and that's it. And after that, we will create the T head to display our columns, and inside that we will have a TR, and we'll have two TH because the table has two fields. One's for the ID, so brand ID, and one is for the name. And then we'll have a T body, which will have the values for the rows. And inside here we have to start a loop. So we will say for each. We will call this a row, and we'll change the collection to be coming from the model. So we'll say model.brands, and we'll iterate that, and we'll create a TR element on each iteration, and we will have two TDs. One is for the ID, so we'll say row.brand ID, and the second one would be brand.name. So with that in place, let's spin up our application and see if we can see the brands page by clicking on the brands link. Our application is up and running, and we can see that we have a brands link over here because we added it to the layout page. So we'll click on that, and as you can see, we have an error because it says the DB context of type bike store context cannot be pooled because it does not have a public constructor accepting a single parameter. If we go back to our code and we go back to the bike store context, you see we made some changes on the onConfiguring method. We can see that there are two constructors, one a public constructor with a parameter, and one is a parameterless constructor. So we will go ahead and delete this constructor and spin up our application again. We will go back to the brands page and see that our list is nicely populating now. So we are able to access the database using the Entity Framework database first approach, and using that you can also build up on the connection, the database connection that we have, and implement the add operation, the delete operation, or getting more lists from different tables of the database. So this was just an example to show that we can successfully make a connection to the database using Entity Framework's database first approach. I hope you liked the video. If you did, press the like button, subscribe to my channel, and press the bell icon so that you don't miss my next video. See you all in the next one.